special edition of, I guess I should call it appropriately, the Provost Roadshow, since this lecture is a combination event sponsored by the Office of the Provost and the lecture series that I sponsor during the entire academic year, and the Monday night lecture series of the College of Architecture and Planning. I'm Warren Vanderhill, Provost of the University, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to, I think, a lecture that you find very, very timely, given the things that have transpired in our speaker's home country in the last several days. Our lecturer this evening is Georg Wittwer, architect and planner from West Berlin. Born in Waldshut in the Black Forest, Mr. Wittwer acquired an informal but undoubtedly practical education as a mason's apprentice, and then enrolled for a formal education at the Technical University of Berlin. There, he earned the MS degree in architecture and urban planning. For 12 years, he gained professional experience in various architectural offices in Waldshut, Berlin, and Dusseldorf, before accepting the post of assistant professor of urban and regional planning at his alma mater, Berlin's Technical University. After 3 years, he left the institution to become planner and then managing director for the Development Corporation of Newtown Wolfen. In 1981, he was named Undersecretary of the Department of Urban Planning and Environmental Protection for the state of Berlin, and in 1986, Secretary for the Department of Building and Housing Affairs. In March of this year, he became a member of Parliament while maintaining a private consulting practice. Mr. Wittwer is no stranger to American college campuses. He's previously lectured at Cooper Union, Harvard University, and the University of California at Berkeley. I'm most grateful to our College of Architecture and Planning, particularly to Professors Jack Wyman and Uwe Kühler, for arranging for Mr. Wittwer's visit to our campus and for co-hosting his activities while he's here. A very special note of interest, I think, for all of this is that Mr. Wittwer's daughter, Kristen, is a graduate student here, majoring in computer science and information and communication sciences. And we're very happy to have her here this evening as well. When I wrote to Mr. Wittwer last July, I really had no idea how timely this visit would be. As I said a few moments ago, in the last few weeks, and indeed in the last 4 days, I think all of us in this country have been enthralled, if not mesmerized, by the rapidity of change in East Germany and the immigration and travels of its citizens to the West. I'm certain you'll have many questions for Mr. Wittwer as he stays here at Ball State this week and will present a number of lectures and forums. And I know you anticipate with me his presentation tonight, which is entitled Recent Developments in Housing in Berlin. Mr. Wittwer, I extend a very warm welcome to you to Ball State University.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm very glad to be in Muncie for these days, and I thank very much to the Provost and Vice President Woollen and Professor Jack Wyman for the invitation to the Provost Lecture Series at Ball State University. Most of you may know the geographical position of Berlin in Europe, but let me visualize the fact that it is about halfway between the city of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, the west side, and Warsaw in Poland. In Germany itself, Berlin is situated nearer to the Polish frontier than to the boundary line separating the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany, you say, and the so-called German Democratic Republic, East Germany. The connection between West Germany and West Berlin is guaranteed by transitways. Geographically and politically, you might therefore think of Berlin as an island situated within Eastern Germany. As you know, Berlin, as well as the whole of Germany, was divided after World War II politically into the three Western sectors controlled by the United States, France, and Great Britain, and the Eastern sector controlled by the Soviet Union. Physically, it was split in 1961 by the 45-kilometer-long wall that runs through the former city center and a further 177 kilometers of concrete and barbed wire around the perimeter of the city. At that time, it was the only way to stop the massive emigration of East Germans to the western part of Germany. And I think it is important to say that this part of the wall is opened in the last days. In the 60s and 70s, Berlin lost permanently population and jobs, particularly because the headquarters of large companies moved away from the city to West Germany. Nevertheless, due to the psychological and political support of the Western allies, especially the United States, and through financial and commercial help from the Federal Republic and by the integration policy, West Berlin had the chance of remaining the most important cultural center of Germany, and by the way, also the city with the largest population. Beginning from the 50s, Berlin developed a new downtown, or the old downtown is on the eastern part of Berlin, a new downtown area around the Kurfürstendamm, new administrative, civic and technical services and similar, as well as a new cultural center near the wall with a Philharmonic Hall. I'll show you. That's the Europe Center. The Philharmonic Hall outside and inside. The Philharmonic Hall by Hans Scharoun. The National Gallery by Mies van der Rohe. That's Mies van der Rohe. And in the background, you can see the Philharmonic Hall. And the State Library, also designed by Hans Scharoun, the outside and the inside. In 1987, Berlin celebrated its 750th anniversary with festivals, concerts, exhibitions, parades, and with an international building exhibition, the IBA. The first documentary evidence of Berlin dates from the 13th century, the century of an inner colonization in Central Europe. The first important phase of the extension of the medieval town took place in the 17th century on the west side of the Baroque castle. Let me show you. The Baroque castle, that's the Baroque castle, and that's the medieval town. The first important phase in the 17th century, on the west side of the Baroque castle, three places marked the three principal entrances to the city with large area enclosures, a square, that's the Brandenburg Gate, an octagon, and a circle in the south. The Brandenburg Gate on the square Pariser Platz, is today the symbol of Berlin, like no other monument. And here on this part of the wall, the young people from East and West Berlin danced some nights before. Palaces and houses then had 2 or 3 stories. Had 2 or 3 stories and were surrounded by large gardens. The king commissioned the building of stately housing along the streets. They were standardized buildings designed by the architect Philipp Gerlach. The collage shows the difference between these housing in the 17th century and the later on building heights in the 19th century. The completion of this urban structure was executed by the architect Friedrich Schinkel in his neoclassicistic style, as for example the theatre, designed by Schinkel himself. You can see that Athens was the model and not Rome. But even on Schinkel's death in 1841, the city was still relatively small, with a population of some 400,000 inhabitants. 20 years later on, in 1862, the then chief of building control in Berlin, James Hobrecht, issued his planning proposal for the surroundings of Berlin. This planning proposal had become necessary because the villages surrounding Berlin had increased over the years into medium-sized towns. This planning proposal was the legal basis for the urban development of the city up to the year 1919. It proposed a system of long main and side streets, of squares and parks encircling the city as a belt. A few years later, this belt was accentuated by an inner city railway ring, the S-Bahn, around the perimeter. You can see, for example, the south band of the S-Bahn, of the north band, and the central line here. This planning policy made Berlin the most densely populated city of the world. At the same time, architecture and town planning aimed at increasing social stability and reducing of class struggle by means of integration strategies. The mingling of various social classes in one building complex was intended to have a generally beneficial influence. Let me show the facades of the 19th century. Here you can see the mingling of working places, the red one, the red parts, and the housing on the streets, on the street side. By the turn of the century, the Mietskaserne had become a negative image, and Berlin had become known as the city of stone. Also, Berlin had many more trees and much more green spaces than, for example, Paris. As a result, all 20th century planning strategies must be seen as a reaction to the Mietskaserne. Right up to the past decade, both politicians and planners believed that the only way to solve the problem was to demolish the old structures and to replace them by newer and more fashionable ones. The zoning plan of 1925 you see other facades of the 19th century. You see the mingling, the mingling of blocks, of the block system. In the inner, normally you have industrial estates, and on the streets you have housing. That's the 25. The zoning plan of 25 provided a basis for socially oriented urban planning. The building ordinance of 1925 prohibited the construction of backyards and finally abandoned the Mietskaserne. The chief of the new municipal department of urban planning, Martin Wagner, designed this type of housing in 27 as an example for the new mode of thinking. The modern housing estate in the 20s, named Siedlungen, adapted the principles of the garden cities, such as the so-called horseshoe estate in Britz, you see it, by Bruno Taut and Martin Wagner. These self-contained model suburbs, consisting of 3 or 4-story blocks of flats, were set in semi-rural surroundings. Their functionalist aesthetics were technically progressive and free of traditional bonds. You can see that the new way for housing followed quite another goal in urbanistic ideas than, for example, was the case in France or the United States. These ideas were propagated by socially oriented architects who created the standards. Another huge is that the Hufeisensiedlung is the inner, the garden part. A part of the Hufeisensiedlung. Another example by Hugo Hering, the model of hygienic freestanding parallel slabs named Zeilenbau, shows the typical urbanistic gesture in the last years of the 20s in Germany. This led to an international phenomenon, which one might call modernist urban space. I think that the symbolic gesture of the Siedlungen is still understood today. The floor plans of these blocks were small but very well organized. However, the lack of the spatial containment, the mechanically arranged series of parallel blocks, had no effect on the social cohesion of the inhabitants. The community feeling of the proletarian collectives remained reserved for the dense urban Mietskaserne of the working class districts. There you had the mixture of housing, of working and different income groups, full of life. In 1945, the city was badly damaged. The long-term planning strategies aimed at complete restructuring of the city and at no time contemplated its refurbishment. In the West, reconstruction programs led to a large-scale demolition. As for example, the old Hansaviertel, bordering on the Tiergarten Park, our central park in Berlin, and near to the western downtown. After demolition, this quarter made way for the Interbau in 1957, an international building exhibition as a programmatic answer to the Eastern national building programs along the Stalinist lines. 45 architects from 13 countries, including Alvar Aalto, Martin Gropius. This one is, this house is Martin Gropius here. And that's a French architect, a Swedish architect, and that's Alvar Aalto, for example. Including Alvar Aalto, Martin Gropius, and Oskar Niemeyer, contributed their ideas of housing. Le Corbusier built his Unité d'habitation du Berlin near the Olympic Stadium, and Hugh Stubbins, you all know the postcard from Berlin. Hugh Stubbins built the Congress Hall as the United States contribution to the Interbau. The 60s and the 70s were the periods of large-scale satellite towns all over the world, and two in Berlin. As for example, the Gropiusstadt, which was named after his planner Walter Gropius, and the Märkisches Viertel in the northern part of Berlin with about 50,000 inhabitants. 540,000 flats were built up to 1983. The dense, small-scale layouts of the 1920s were abandoned for higher slabs with lifts widely separated, occupying a no man's land of open space. I think it is difficult to feel at home in a vast, abstract infrastructural network. The effect of this large-scale policy was an emotional uproar. We have learned our lesson from the mistakes made in the past 20 years. Our approach today, in a decentralized fashion, amongst other things, this has led to the rediscovery of the enclosed square, that was once so typical for Berlin. The Victoria Luise Square, you can see it here, is one example for a great number of similar squares in Berlin. I think that it is a job of politicians to stimulate the development in the cultural field and to help inhabitants identify more closely with their city, to increase communication and further the economy. The International Building Exhibition was founded to look at the latest theories and methods of architecture and urban planning and to put the most suited ones into practice. The program for the Interbau, for the International Building Exhibition, the IBA, has a total volume of 1,000 million US dollars. It was a task of the IBA company to develop new types of housing in the city, in several parts of the city as examples. I will show you the plan for the IBA. These are the main places where they had to plan. I think it should be a showcase for the reconstruction and refurbishment of large urban areas. It encouraged the public debate and helped to raise the standard of everyday architecture. Many projects have been eye-openers for laymen and experts alike. There were two goals for the IBA. First, the city repairing in those parts where we had a lot of plots with damaged buildings, and second, the urban renewal in those parts of the city where we still have the traditional housing of the 19th century, mostly in a bad containment and with a low standard. Let me show some examples. Rauchstraße. These blocks of flats or urban villas on the Rauchstraße, close to the downtown, were built along an overall concept by Rob Trier, respecting the historical layout of 19th century villas. 7 architects from 3 countries used a square plan of 21.5 meters and 5 floors each, with 5 flats as a mutual basis. That's Rob Trier himself as a designer. And that's a house built by Hollein, by Hans Hollein. The architects have demonstrated the variety of floor plans, lifestyles, and aesthetics within the restrictive limits of social housing. Of course, there are some spectacular contributions by American architects. This is the courtyard of the housing complex by Charles Moore in Tegel, in the north of Berlin. The other side of the house is oriented towards the water, an old industrial harbor, now changed for recreation to, I think, an idyllic situation. That's the part developed, designed by Charles Moore. That's Charles Moore. A small island, an old harbor, and the library, two designed by Charles Moore, and a lot of other housing. Moore designed the layout of the overall concept with urban villas by other architects, and the library you have seen by Charles Moore. I think you know Moore's theory that a building must be experienced as a place to move in, evoke memories that, as well as catch the eye with a decorative outside. And in this slide, you can look at Peter Eisenman's house. What uses back on an elaborate theory behind it. It is an eye-catcher on the crossing of Koch and Friedrichstraße, right to Checkpoint Charlie, in front of the Berlin Wall. Let me return to Charles Moore's theory. I think that it may be sufficient for a solitary building. I would like to add some other demands for housing in cities. It is the understanding of the street and the neighborhood buildings, the adventure of the open space. It is too the quality of the contact between the dwelling and the outside of buildings. Further, it is the quality of the floor plans for living by manifold, multivarious chances, and it is the quality of the semi-public rooms and spaces, the staircase as well as the courtyard, as a living space outside. That means that every building is to be seen in the context of the city, the open space and the usable court and green space. I think that these ideas have their social qualities. They define the quality of living in the city, and also they define partly the amount of social costs. Let me show some examples. That's an example for townhouses with a pedestrian street. Behind the houses you find gardens. Another project of the IBA with 5 floors, the street front. Behind you find the courtyard with playgrounds. Let me show you the courtyard. That's the courtyard. Another view of the street front. This, and an aerial view. This aerial view shows another IBA project as an example of city repairing. Large parts of this quarter, situated near the old city, had been destroyed by air raids. On the upper side of the slide, you find the courtyard housing shown before. This part here. It's an example of city repairing, I think. In the middle of the slide, another type of housing. Here. Another type of housing I will show you. It's a front with a parking road. Sorry. It's a garden side. And another picture of oh, it's not sharp enough, sorry. Another picture of the garden. The various types of housing were designed by a group of German architects, Hilscher, Mücke, Demblin, and I think that they developed a real dwelling park in the city. Here's another project. It was designed by the Italian architect Gregotti, The estate is named door houses for the big open doors on the street front with small open spaces between the blocks. Not far from the before shown housing estate, you have an example near the Berlin Wall of city, another part of city repairing. The fourth, the upper project under construction is designed by Bohigas and Mackay. And on the right side, the red one, is a project of Aldo Rossi. With his another picture about Aldo Rossi, it's Aldo Rossi, is his corner solution on the Wilhelmstraße. In former times, this housing is in a distance of 10 minutes for the pedestrians to go to under the Linden, the famous boulevard now in East Berlin. If you change your point of view, you could see the tower of the Italian architect De Rossi, and in the background, a housing block. In the background, a housing block combined with a kindergarten designed by a German architect. De Rossi's tower as an annex building with terrace housing by the German architect von Bollwitz. These terraces can be changed to winter gardens by the users themselves. Nearby, you have an old part of the old city. It is a court with an old industrial estate where they produce books, a book bindery. The chief architect of the IWA, as you know, was Josef Paul Kleihues. And at the end of his working for IWA, he had the chance to design a housing estate which now is under construction. See a grand gesture to a green belt. Nearby, housing estates of Gernot Nalbach, a Berlin architect, and behind, design of Haus Rucker and Co. and Company, Haus Rucker and Company, Vienna, architect from Vienna. I think the city lives by the different views and the multitude of signatures and faces. Let me show another American example. That's a design by John Hajduk. I think these are the first houses he ever built. Another view of part of John Hajduk's architecture. He has a very good mixture of different types of apartments in his houses. From Hajduk's tower, you can look on one of the earliest projects of the International Building Exhibition. It is a project of Hermann Herzberger, a Dutch architect. He worked with self-organized group of owners, and he has a street side, the playground, and another view of the court. I think you can feel the human scale of this housing estate, and I guess social costs shall be very low in this house. Near Herzberger estate, you have a new development designed by the architect Kohlhoff and other architects. The inner street with housing, the playground, and another view of the court. At present, our city contains more than 500,000 of rental flats which have been newly built since 1947, and 500,000 of traditional rental flats, especially in the inner districts of the city, built before 1914. Views like this, with modernized housing, dominate this traditional part of the city. They define the characteristics, the air of large quarters in Berlin. I think that the recent development of our housing in Berlin establishes more sensitivity for the scale of the older parts of the city. Furthermore, the new estates have more regard to ecological aspects of the city, which are to be seen as a social quality. For a long time, after the Second World War, we did not think about our traditional housing estates. It was also a very important result of IBA that the redevelopment of and the renewal of these quarters in a very soft manner and step by step became the official political line. So, for example, in the last 6 years, we spent more than 400 million Deutschmark a year for modernizing and repairing of old 19th century housing. Generally, old houses shall be modernized and repaired by help of governmental money if the costs are not higher than about 80% of comparable costs of new housing. I think that it is very important that every city has its personal history, and I want to see this personality in the face of our city, of every city. And in this idea, we have to be softly with the characteristics of our cities. Today, we have great lack of housing in Berlin. Since 1988, a large number of fugitives from the German Democratic Republic, from East Germany, and a lot of German immigrants from Poland, the Soviet Union, and other Eastern countries came to Berlin, as well as to other regions of the Federal Republic. In Berlin, at the same time, we have an increasing population, especially many young people want to start an own household. So at the moment, we should have 35,000 units more, and following the calculations from then, more than 100,000 units in the next 10 years. Our city will change its face, I think. For we have to develop a higher density, as well as to develop plots which were not used since the end of the war. Let me end. You have an example of new housing between old houses. And here's the inner part of the courtyard. Let me end with a view on the eastern part of our city. In the foreground, you see our Goldilse, we say, the Victoria, and the Grand Axis of Berlin. At the end of the Grand Axis here, you see the Brandenburg Gate with the wall, and behind you see the red townhouse, the old townhouse of Berlin. On the left side, you have the Parliament House, which were burned down by the Nazis in 1933, the former house of German Parliament. As you realize, ladies and gentlemen, the last days in Berlin were very important for us, and I think that there is a new hope for us to have reunited city, Berlin, and maybe to a reunited Germany. Thank you very much. Wahnsinnig stottern. Jetzt? Ja, ich hab's schon.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wittwer has graciously consented to take any questions we might have, not only about his presentation, but about other matters that might occur to you. So at this time, those of you who have questions, if you would raise your hand and stand and address Mr. Wittwer, he'll do his best to respond. Questions?
Yeah.
Okay. You just hold on to that.
Ja, bitte.
Problem in Germany of homelessness, people who do not have homes.
Aha. You mean that you have not enough homes in Berlin? Yeah. The problem is that we had, before the large wave of fugitives who came to Berlin, we had already problems with housing, with social housing especially. And we had programs about 7,000 housing a year for Berlin. But now it is necessary to build much more when we shall have more fugitives from the eastern part of Germany. That's right? You? Ah. Weil wir bis die Antwort
Other questions?
The fact that the wall is being broken, can this affect in any way the fact that you could think of urban planning to have building in East Berlin? Is there any prospect that part of the housing problem being faced in West Berlin will be addressed by some of the space in eastern part of the city?
I think that well, it's a problem of the development of the context between East and West, and I think that at the moment it is not exactly to be seen how quickly this context and the working together really shall begin or shall go on. For example, I had never the chance during my time as senator to speak directly with my colleague in Eastern Berlin. I could go to Dresden and discuss with a colleague in Dresden, or in Halle or in other big cities of eastern part of Germany, but it wasn't possible to go to Berlin. And I think that this development will go slowly. But there is, I think, one, let me be a bit longer. Sorry to do that, I must do it. In the last 20 years, in West Berlin and in East Berlin too, the planners were oriented on the old plan of the old city. And each of them, in West and in Ost and in East, they controlled exactly that there remains a chance to bring together the two parts of the city. It was dangerous in the 60s and in the 70s there it's changed a lot of things. There were changed a lot of things with new ideas of architecture, but in the last years it was controlled very good. And we knew exactly that when we had exhibitions of new planning in Berlin, in West Berlin, that our Eastern colleagues came and looked at it, and they took photographs and so on. And if they had, and if we had an exhibition, you could be sure that 1 or 2 months later we shall have an exhibition of the plans in East Berlin. And so there were indirect contact between the planners without speaking together by the drawings, if you want. And so I think it would be possible in some years, but now at the moment it's not possible to do.
Since Krenz has announced that he doesn't want to be speaking about the unification of the youth of Poland very soon, he stated that he doesn't even want that to be on the agenda and he wants to totally avoid that. How do you think that Poland and others would be able to start bringing the idea of unification with Germany, with the Democratic Republic of Germany?
But I think we must shortly explain. There are contacts by the federal government to the government of East Germany. The problem was that Berlin has a special status defined by the Allied. And our contacts with the east side, with the eastern part, went on Bonn. You know, we had, the problem was that from eastern countries, for a long time they tried to have 3 German states. East Berlin, East Germany, West Germany, and Berlin, West Berlin. And for this, that's the reason why we cannot have a direct contact between East and West Berlin. It was organized by federal government. And I think that in the next years, a lot of things have to change in the eastern part of Germany, with free elections and with open frontiers and so on. And I think that in this time, all those possibility to speak together will begin.
How is the influence of the Greens and the environmental movement? Has that had a direct influence in planning, design?
Yeah, there is a very big influence on the architecture in the last years. And maybe you have seen on the slides that the changement from the 70s to the 80s is very important. For we have a lot of discussions naturally with the Green Party in Berlin too, with the Alternative Party in Berlin, about every plot. And we have since last year a new land using plan, and parallel is developed, and I started it when I was Under Secretary of State for town development and environmental protection. Parallel to the land using plan, we have a new green using plan for the whole city, developed. And in every part where we have building plans, where we develop building plans, you have a plan for the green space and for the green using. And I think that maybe that in Berlin, in this manner to work, we do more than in other parts of Germany. Yeah? I think it would be interesting if you are interested to have such planning such plans, I would like to send it to you, if you are interested. It is for the landscape planners. It is, I think, very interesting to see what we developed in Berlin.
I want to thank you very much at this special time in your country's history for honoring us with your presence. It's very wonderful to have you here. And thank you very much for coming.